for our audience, so in case someone isn't familiar with it.
Okay, so toxic shame. I would say that that's, we have natural shame. We have natural shame, like I wouldn't take all of my clothes off and run down the street where I live because I'd be embarrassed. We have natural shame around things like, doing our bodily processes. You do that in front of people. We also have natural shame, actually, and this buys into, links into the eating disorders thing. We also have natural shame around doing things that are bad for our bodies, actually generate shame. So addictions, eating disorders will increase the sense of shame. And I would say toxic shame, as opposed to natural shame, is the shame that we have, in a way, and there's no blame or guilt or associated here, but the shame that we feel, we must be a bad person because, a parent has said you should be ashamed of yourself, or a teacher has said you should be ashamed of yourself, or we've been made to feel less than worthy, less than good, or that we've done that somehow we're bad people for reasons that actually, for example, let me just give you a really simple example. For example, when we're babies, we don't have any sense of disgust, really. We don't have any sort of so we might be interested in the contents of our nappies. We might be kind of and if our mother comes along and shames us about that, we're kind of like, well, what's wrong with my poop? Is beautiful. It's something that's come out of my body. How could you possibly tell me off and tell me that I should be ashamed when I'm just investigating the world? So that kind of shaming, and it's not, the parents aren't, they're just doing their best. It's like the Four Agreements, they're just doing the best with the knowledge that they have, and they may feel disgusted about, the poop being smeared on the coffee table or whatever it is. But that's what I mean by toxic shame. Does that answer the question? And it's the shame that is put upon us unknowingly, unwittingly, but as we're growing up, so that we feel like there's something wrong with us, that we feel like, we're bad people. Or if we've got an older sibling that bullies us, and again, that's one of the factors in eating disorders. And they're children, they're innocent, they're just doing what they're doing, But toxic shame can happen accidentally, but it can feel very. And some children, some people might not be susceptible to it, but highly sensitive people are more likely to be susceptible to to feeling shame and to feeling, there's something wrong with me. Something inherently wrong with me. That's what I mean by toxic shame. So all of this can add up to, by the time we come to teenage years, and tragically much earlier now, the eating disorders are starting to appear in people's lives. They actually, eating disorders, another thing about them, I wouldn't say that they were addictions, because I don't see them like that, but they can act very out in our lives very much like an addiction. So I've also worked as an drug addiction, alcohol and gambling addiction counsellor. So I found the link with the eating disorders particularly fascinating, in that, they're not addictions per se, but some of the behaviours can be addicting. So it can be very, addicting, the process of, say, binge eating. If you've got binge eating disorder, or if you're suffering from bulimia, having the dopamine fix of having the, looking forward to doing the binge, because let's face it, part of the reason why some people get into bulimia is, I can binge eat my favourite foods, and then I can purge them, and I'm not going to get fat. So there's that, and there's also the addicting component of some of the foods that are eaten. They can act out as addictions do, and in the same way that, say, drugs and alcohol are used as a medicament to control or suppress or to numb out anxiety, helplessness, hopelessness, in someone that becomes addicted, gradually becomes addicted to those, then they work out, oh, actually, if I have a glass of wine, oh, it chills me out, that, and then that over a process of time, if that's used as a medicament, it can eventually become an addiction if that's the path of that addiction. But similarly, eating disorders can work in the same way, in that they can be used to numb out or get a sense of control. I know that when I suffered from anorexia, I can look back on my life now and just think, okay, so that was my way of coping with an overwhelmingly stressful period of my life. And the anorexia was almost like that was the only sense of control that I felt that I had at the time. And even though I wasn't aware of it at the time, because if I'd known what I was doing, then I would have got it. But that sense of control of, right, I can control my food intake, I can control the number on the scales, this is what I can control. I can control, refusing to have food, refusing to eat. And another thing about anorexia is that if you don't eat, you can't feel. So it's a way of controlling your feelings. If you're not eating, then effectively your body shuts down. You can't, if you're not having any, nowhere near the range or the range of nutrition that you need, or the caloric intake that you need, your brain can't actually make the neurotransmitters like serotonin. For those people that are on SSRIs, you'll understand what I mean, but the neurotransmitter that makes us feel chilled out, that makes us feel, okay, I can cope with life, all of those really precious brain chemicals that make us be able to, function, we shut those down. Anorexia, another thing that happens eventually is that you lose your hormonal cycle as well, because you simply haven't got the nutrition to make the hormones. So all sorts of things happen. So that is a way of completely shutting down feelings, which of course, if your feelings are completely overwhelming, that's the medicament. The anorexia is the medicament. And with bulimia, it can be very numbing to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat without, that can be the numbing thing. And then the purging thing can be self-punishment, or it can feel like relief. And then, after the purge, it feels like exhaustion. And then often, shame and anger about the cycle of just thinking, oh, I'm never going to do it again. I'm never going to do it again. And then the whole way that the cycle goes is, if someone's starving to try to mitigate the effects of, the binge that maybe they've had the previous day, then they're hungry. And if they're not allowing themselves to eat certain foods, then those certain foods, which are, probably going to be quite high in calories and fat and protein, that their body is desperately craving and saying, I want some of that, please. And then that becomes that can start off another binge. So it's a cyclical thing. So people can sort of feel like they're entering into an eating disorder, saying, yeah, I've got control of this is okay, I can, but very soon it actually becomes a self-repeating cycle, and the cycle of shame and low self-esteem just drives it.
I have a question. So this is like a very extreme situations, and maybe there's also like maybe mild situations, and I'm gonna ask you this. When a person eat normal, but every time when they look in the mirror, it looks like she's overweight. And she's not overweight, but every time she looks in the mirror, she sees an image of overweight. Not like overweight for her. Yeah. So what is that disorder that the person have?
So I'd say a couple of things here, at least, that going into that. One of the things I would say, that if we look in the mirror, and I can certainly relate to this as a child, certainly I would sometimes look in the mirror and I'd imagine that my body was like, not even necessarily fat, but just out of proportion. So there's a tad, what you're touching on there is a tad of body dysmorphia, which I'm not an expert on, but it would feed into, and it's sometimes, an eating disorder can be I've seen people that, not as clients, but, that I've known, that I've, been work colleagues that have had body dysmorphia, and that has led to them becoming anorexic. Another thing about this is that the feeling of feeling fat can often be around unexpressed feelings. So unconscious, unexpressed feelings can make people feel fat if they've got an eating disorder, whereas actually what they're feeling, or what they're kind of like their body's feeling, is actually these unexpressed feelings that need to be acknowledged, that need to be felt, that need to that need to be able to come out. So, and it's the thing about looking in the mirror and seeing, I look overweight. That is part of the driver for an eating disorder, or it can be, if that's taken to extremes. I would imagine that quite a lot of women look in the mirror and just think, oh, I could look a bit slimmer. I could, that in itself isn't an eating disorder, but I just feel for myself, isn't that tragic? Because it's part of the way that we're conditioned in society, part of what we've absorbed from from mainstream media, or from the modelling industry. And I'm not blaming the modelling industry; it's not their fault. Or part of what we've absorbed from looking at social media and all these airbrushed pictures. All these pictures of people in the media that are they're airbrushed, and they're made to look different from what they actually look like, and women comparing themselves to that.
And you know what? Before social media in my country, especially in my city, I think that we have a lot of problems with that, because over there, all women like 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old are looking something to do in their bodies, because they are not the look of the body that normally is sexy or attracted to men.
Yes.
And I see in my country is in the city where I am from, you can get the best surgery doctors because of plastic surgery, because they are practicing all these women in my city, because they need to have the perfect butt, the perfect titties, the slim here, very slim, and always the comparison with other women. So if you have a little bit overweight, you're completely out of shape, you're so fat, you don't fit in the normative of the women the way should look. So before social media, I would say culturally, and some cultures are very strong on that, because it's like, oh, we need to look beautiful, we need to look in some way for this our men to look of us, and it's completely wrong.
And it's an absolute tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy, and part of it comes from, there are so many threads. There are so many threads here. Part of it comes from this thing of low self-worth, low self-esteem, because that woman not having that sovereignty of just saying, actually, I don't care what the norm is supposed to be. I feel sexy in my own body. I love my own body. I feel like that I'm just accepting what divinity has given us as our own body. There's another thing here, and I think, and this is a big subject that we could do a whole webinar on. This is about people's fear of death, and that is what my feeling is. Part of what drives this. You have to look young. You have to look young, and to look young, you have to have pert titties, you have to have a slim waist that shows that you're still of childbearing age, you have to have a tight ass, you have to have no wrinkles, so you have a facelift, and all these wrinkles, and all of this stuff. And the way that I compute it, it's hang on a minute, we are throwing out the crones, the old women. It's this almost like Mother Earth hating culture that actually, you know, in Native American tradition and in indigenous cultures, the elders of the society are revered because they've had the wisdom of living all of those years. And it's like, in this society, it's just, they just get thrown away because we're not seen as sexy anymore. We're not seen as youthful anymore. We're not seen as, so my gut feeling about it is that all of that, the unconscious of this is driven by, it's a fear of death. It's a fear of looking old, of maybe not being sexy anymore in that way. But of course, we can be as sexy as long as we feel sexy.
Exactly.
In our bodies. But just because we're not perceived in that way by society, it's, pushing women into having all of these actually quite harmful procedures and actually